It's Mike from Better Me, and I'm really excited to be back with you guys because today I want to talk about how you teach your kids whether or not your house is an asset or liability. And I think there's a lot of mixed feelings on this topic. I think certain people think their house is an asset, and I think certain people think their house is a liability, and I think it's really based on the education that you have on the topic. So what I did here is I put a couple of things down just to see what the difference might be between whether or not it's an asset and a liability. We can go through it together, and at the end we can come to a conclusion on whether we think it's an asset or a liability. So when we talk about assets and liabilities, the fundamental things we talk about are what? Well, what is an asset? So an asset is something that brings money into your pocket, money or cash flow into your pocket. A liability is just the opposite. Liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. And so if we're looking at the asset side, when we talk about a house, well, what do we have? So we have appreciation, we have instant equity, we have property loans, and we have tax deduction. And I put that as a question mark, and I'll explain why later. So if we go over the appreciation piece of the home, when we talk about appreciation of the home, we're talking about based on market conditions or supply and demand. So for example, if you buy a house for $500,000 and you find that supply and demand shifts so that there's a greater amount of demand than there is supply, the amount of that home is most likely going to increase due to market demand. So if the value of the home increases from say $500,000 to $600,000, now you have $100,000 of equity in the property that you didn't have before because your home has increased in value due to the appreciation, due to the market demanding that there needs to be more appreciation on that asset because there is a bigger demand for the property than there is supply. The second thing is instant equity. So when you buy a property, normally you put a down payment. So it's anywhere between say 3% to 20%. And we use 20% or we put 20% down because we normally want to avoid something called PMI, which is private mortgage insurance. So we put 20% down, we avoid that, which is usually, depending on the house, it could be a couple hundred, a couple $1,000s. It depends on really how much the house is selling for and how much the house is worth, okay? But we forego the PMI if we put down 20%. And what does 20% mean? Well, that means that I'm going to have to take 20% of the value of the property, and I'm going to have to take that in cash, and I'm going to have to give that over when I go ahead and buy the property. And so if you take a $500,000 house, for example, 20% of $500,000 is $100,000. So when you go to close for the house, you have to come up with $100,000 to bring to the closing table. And what does that do? That gives you something called instant equity in the property, okay? So now you have $100,000 into the property that you put as your own cash that you could potentially borrow against if you needed to. But again, it depends on a couple of other factors. What you bought the property at, what the current market conditions are, etc. So you may not be able to borrow against that money depending on how much your house is worth at that time. Property loans. So this is really great if you understand the money game, if you understand how the system works. You can actually use property loans. You can use property loans to be able to borrow money or take money out of your property. And this is really great because you can use those funds to do other things like maybe fund some businesses or investments or things like that. A lot of times people refinance, they'll take cash out of their property and they'll buy things like vehicles, they'll go on vacations, and they'll buy liabilities with it, which put them further into debt. What you really want to do is you want to take these property loans and you want to do things like buy investment properties. You want to buy other assets that are going to make you money and produce cash flow for you. And then the last thing is the tax deduction. So normally tax deductions are really far and few between when you buy a home that you actually live in. So when you buy a home that you actually live in, you're paying interest. For probably the first 14 to 15 years, that mortgage payment is going to be strictly interest. But the cool thing is you can actually deduct that on your taxes. You can deduct the mortgage interest on your taxes, which gives you a lower taxable income. So you actually end up paying less taxes. So that's it on the asset side, guys. So we have appreciation, we have instant equity, we have property loans, and we have tax deductions, okay? If we go to the liability side, it's something a little bit different. We have taxes and insurance, we have mortgage, we have the CapEx, which are large expenses, stuff like new roof, new windows, new chimney, heater, hot water heater, things like that, central air conditioning. Those are all considered CapEx. Then we have other expenses like microwaves, refrigerators, dishwashers, new sinks, new toilets, things like that. Then we have depreciation. So So the house can actually depreciate in value. So just like supply and demand can push the value of a property forward, causing it to appreciate, it can also depreciate in value with market conditions. So when the supply of a home or homes out there on the market is greater than the demand for that home can actually depreciate in value. And so when we look at the liability side, guys, I'm going to explain every single one of these. So taxes and insurance. So even if you own the home outright, you've purchased the home in cash, you're still going to owe taxes. And in some cases, you're going to own insurance. Now, the taxes you're going to have to pay for the remainder of the time that you have that property. Okay? And so again, because you're paying taxes on the property, even though you pay that house off completely, you're still going to have that liability, that money that's coming out of your pocket. Okay? The second thing is your mortgage. So let's say you have a mortgage on your property. Let's say you've paid 20%, you've put 20% down. So you have no private mortgage insurance. So now you have no PMI, but you're still going to have a mortgage, and almost all of the monthly payment that you make towards that mortgage is going to go to interest for the first, say, 14 to 15 years of making those monthly payments. CapEx. So if you own the home outright, regardless of whether or not you purchased it in cash or you're making monthly payments, you're still going to have to prepare for large expenses like new roofs, like new windows, like new hot water heaters, central air conditioning systems, or maybe landscaping that needs to be done on the property. That all needs to be taken into account, and that's all going to be taken out of your pocket. While there's no cash flow coming in from the property, you're still going to be having to take money out of your pocket to make sure the property is properly maintained. Next is expenses. So dishwasher goes, sinks are leaking, toilets are leaking. You're going to have to replace all of those items sooner or later, even if it's a brand new home. Sometimes sooner if it's a brand new home, because a lot of times those items aren't broken in, and you may not have a lot of good luck with those right at first, right off the bat, if it's all brand new. So sometimes it's actually better to buy into like a home that's, you know, been on the market for a while, that's existed for a while, rather than buy a brand new home. Because a lot of times, like I said, some pieces of the home, like whether it be structural or the appliances, a lot of the time that stuff is not broken in. And so sometimes new stuff can give us a lot more trouble than old stuff can. And then depreciation. So again, if the supply outweighs the demand, you run the risk of depreciation. Like the current economic situation is at the time of this recording, inflation is about 8.5%. The Fed has raised interest rates yet again to try to curtail the inflation that is plaguing the economy here. And so interest rates have also increased now to, I think, about a little over 6% at this point for mortgages. And so the higher the interest rate goes for the mortgages, it's going to make it less attractive for people to buy homes. It's also going to push people out of their homes that may have adjustable rate mortgages and aren't able to afford their homes anymore. And so the supply is going to go up. When that happens, your house could be worth less than it was worth, say, a year ago. There's been a lot of situations in this country and actually around where we are, where if you go onto realtor.com or some other realty site, you can see that the homes are actually decreasing in price month over month. So you run the risk of depreciation. So if we look at these two different columns and we kind of compare the columns, assets and the liabilities, we can see that an asset is anything that puts money into your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. And so if we look at all this, while we may have assets on this side of the equation, while we may have appreciation of the property, that's not guaranteed. While we may have instant equity in the property, that's still your cash money, your income that's going into the property at closing. While you may be able to do property loans, you may not be able to get the money out of your property if your property doesn't have enough equity to sustain it. So if what you currently owe on the mortgage is greater than the equity in the home, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting money out of that property. And then tax deduction. While you can deduct your mortgage interest, there are no real other tax deductions currently if you live in your home that you can take. And so looking at the liability side, we know that your house, when you have the asset side, you're still going to have that liability side no matter what. And so even if you own your home outright, you're going to have to pay the taxes, you're going to have to pay the mortgage, the capital expenditures, the other small expenses, and the depreciation. So if we look at all this together and we know that no matter what, even if we have a paid off home, even if we know that we can get property loans from the property, even if we know that the house is going to appreciate, you're still paying for all these other things on this side of the equation. So the question is your house an asset or is it truly a liability? Well, it's my opinion, based on everything that I've seen, everything that I've studied, that your home is actually a liability because it takes money out of your pocket. So hear me out. Conversely, if we teach our kids that there's another option, and the second option is they can buy an investment property. So I would recommend an investment property with no less than 2 doors, meaning no less than 2 units. That way, if somebody moves out of the first unit, you always have an income producing property, right? Because you always have somebody in that unit. And so people pay you at the end of every month. Your tenants pay you at the end of every month, we hope. And so that money that they pay you minus the expenses that you pay on the property is your cash flow. So ultimately what you want is you want a really good cash flowing property. And so with investment properties as well, there's a lot more tax deductions that you will have and that you can take to further reduce your taxable income. Whereas the home that you live in, you're really limited to deducting your mortgage interest, okay? And so there are other ways we want to be able to teach our kids to be able to manage their money, to make sure that they're not spending their money in ways that put them into debt. And so that would be a way to do that. Conversely, buying an investment property, have the cash flow from that investment property actually pay for the home that they're in. If they can buy an investment property for a low enough value and be able to bring people in to pay the rent on that property and bring back the cash flow, enough cash flow, they can make it so they can pay for the mortgage on the current investment property plus some of the mortgage on the home that they live in. So now they're using some of their investment property to actually pay for the home that they live in. So guys, I hope this video was informative. If you guys have any questions or comments, please comment below. Please like the channel and please subscribe. And until then guys, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.